Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. Thanks, sponsors, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC.com, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike's Stadium Sports Cards, Heritage Auctions, Huggins and Scott Auctions, Topps, Upper Deck, and Panini. This episode is with Rich Klein. We were talking about splitting up a collection that had been jointly purchased by a couple of good guys, I think, but they were not on the same page of how to split it. There's arbitration and there's mediation. Arbitration is an arbitrator says, here's what I've decided. A mediator says, here's the way I think you guys could work this out. Can you meet in the middle? And both parties have to agree. So we were definitely mediating. Rich and I went over there to this guy's house where all the cards were. It was way more than what we thought. This is a story of our experience in doing that. Again, thanks, Rich. We're never too old to learn things and enjoy different aspects of the hobby. So here it is. Rich, let's talk about this collection we helped a couple of guys split. We're having a conversation with one of the guys. He said, I really want to split it up. We've co-owned a collection. It's time to break it up. And the other co-owner has possession of the cards and wants to make sure it's divided equitably. And he said, could you help with that? I said, I could, and I'm sure Rich could. Rich and I have a system of checks and balances. I think we could make short work of it. How many cards is it? He said, I don't know. It's a lot. But I said, if I just come over there, I said, I'd be happy to help. I'm a pro bono consultant. I love cards, and I've always been about facilitating trade and fair deals, two-way streets. He said, okay, that's great. So we worked out a time, and you were gracious enough to come over there. We met over there at this guy's house. We went in the living room, and there were a bunch of cards on the kitchen table. There were some great cards there, some great partial sets. And they said, we haven't resolved this. So you're looking through them. I'm looking through them. So how about if we do it this way? And after about 5 or 10 minutes, they were, okay, if I take these big cards and you take these partial sets and we throw this in, then that'll work out. And I said, that was great. Rich, thanks for coming over. Thanks, guys. That was pretty painless. And he said, oh, wait a minute. What? Around the corner here, in the kitchen, in the breakfast room, dining room area, we went around the corner and there were 300,000 cards. What do you think?
And that doesn't count what was in the garage. The garage was easy.
I was saving that for the other punchline. We did the 300,000 and then that'd be 200,000 in the garage, because if a monster box is 4,000 or 5,000, there were more than 50. It was pretty mind-boggling. You were so helpful, but we made pretty short work of it because
you had done this before.
I've done it before, yeah.
I really hadn't done something that size before. I thought it was going to be more like a draft. No, it's just bulk it out. You had done that before. So what was the difference between your Boston experience in 1979 that you talked about, where George Lyon says, I don't want the bulk, I just want these two items, and this process recently?
There were 12 guys. So one of the 12, George is one of the 12. So I had to make 12 piles. The simpler part is it was all vintage. And so there probably were, could there have been 100,000 cards there vintage, which went from pre-war up to, this was in the 70s. So it was mostly 1950s and 40s and 30s. If it's 100,000 cards, that's 8,000 per guy. So that sounds about right. But they were pretty much in order. People, even non-collectors, had complete sets or grouped them by years. So it's pretty easy. There were more than one 49 Bowman set, and there were several 50 Bowman sets and things like that. So I'd put each one in a stack and make sure I did it in waves like I did. And I just streamed it on the floor, and they drew numbers for who could pick, and I picked last. Then some of the stuff at the very end of the stack were these very high demand cards that I tried to make sure there was equal value there. I did the same thing here because there were 500 9-pocket sheet albums with partials. Pretty much, I think that I treated them all as partial sets. Because I think they were, because the 2000 sets had already had the Brady stripped out for football, and 76 Topps football, there's no Peyton in there. So anyway, the non-vintage albums with plastic sheets, good luck getting them out of the plastic sheets. So anyway, each guy got half of them. And so we just paraded one in this pile, one in this pile. And then you were helping to identify anything that was vintage. There were a couple of binders of 60 Topps, 61 Topps, 62. And so we got to that. I did even and odd. I put the 60 Topps, a couple albums, then the 61 Topps, and then the 62 Topps. And then they were successively taking turns choosing which of the two parallel piles that they took. But you just can't let them pick one at a time, but they'd have a big stack. One guy would pick, I'll take this big stack and the other big stack, which was similar. And I said, you can look through them, but you're going to get bored pretty quickly. You're going to see that the stacks are pretty evenly. You're good at that. I'm good at that. They weren't complaining, and we got out of there pretty quick. We really got
we got out of there in time to have lunch, which was not bad.
We started at 11 o'clock. Yeah. Do you perceive that they were pleased?
I think they were satisfied.
Yeah.
And the funniest thing is when we were talking about Triple, I think this became a good lesson because the owner of Triple is the person who bought that collection.
And passed it off to those guys.
When the Plano store was still the main Triple store, I walked in one day to get whatever supplies I needed, and I didn't see all the boxes. I saw the albums. So then there's been stuff sold from them along the way, too. It was pretty good, and you can tell just how big the accumulation was.
Do you perceive, because we have the two different philosophies that you and I espouse, I think they did your philosophy of when they bought it, they immediately sold some of the good cards to get to sea level, to get their money back. So I think everything there was gravy.
It's gravy. For the owner of Triple, it was gravy when he sold it. And then for these two people, It was gravy when they sold it. So everybody's made money along the way.
And that's the way it's supposed to be. But what is the final resting place for these 500 albums that each guy has? I really thought, like with my George Lyons experience, that at the end of it, one of the two guys was to say, you know what? I really don't want all these albums. Or for this stack, you can have both stacks and give me $50 or $100. But it was none of that. They each got huge bulk.
One guy's retired. One guy is really retired. And one guy really retired. Is retired. So he's on eBay and he's selling stuff now that way. So for him, it's listing and shipping and selling. And for the other person, he's retired from his job, but he's still active. He's doing shows and he's going to do some bulk and he'll figure it out. So for both of them, it's okay. Both of them are going to find a use for what they're doing. I don't think either of them are really going to bang out, other than the few big cards that came in the first part of the whole deal. I don't think anybody's really going to bang out the biggest cards first. They both made their money. They're both profit at this point, so they can spend a little more time going forward.
Again, these two guys, I was just saying, no real money changed hands between them that day. They didn't want to buy the other half of the collection because that's one way you divide up a collection. Like I said, with George Lyons, is that he had his big stack, 8,000 cards. He said, I want these 5. You can have the others for what I had in them, which was ridiculous. And I said, George, that's a terrible deal for you. He said, I am completely satisfied. I'm walking home with a briefcase. I'm not lugging the cards. And for me, it was just to merge more into my stock. So yeah, one of the guys, if he sets up at shows, but you still can't bring all those plastic.
But you can figure out ways. One of them, he may give me some donations from the extra bulk. And that way we will move some of the lower end into the lower end world by having bulk. Okay, Rich, you get the bulk. You know what to do with bulk. You figure it out.
That would lighten his load. But have you had people give you bulk stuff that's in plastic sheets like that? Because there's $10,000 worth of plastic sheets, I think.
Ask my good friend Raymond.
Okay.
When the owner of Triple sold out, the original owner sold out, and basically this was the Monday after Thanksgiving in 2017, and I got to move 200,000 cars into what was then my office by myself that day in 4 separate loads, an amazing day. He calls me at 12 o'clock and says, Rich, you got to come down to the store. Okay. I came down to the store. They loaded my car up totally. Okay. The car was totally packed. There was these cards, they're like stapled. They weren't in plastic sheets, but they were stapled into card savers. And ask Raymond what it was like trying to get those cards out of the card savers sometime. You'll hear some stories with maybe a 4-letter word or 2 thrown in for good measure.
You could have had a workers' comp claim there. That's horrible. But just getting them out of plastic sheets, it's the supplies. It's all those albums. What do you do with the albums? And some of them were junk wax, partial sets, where there was more value in the used plastic sheets than there is in the cards that were in them. If you've got all these plastic sheets, maybe the tariffs will make new plastic sheets difficult to acquire at the old prices. Anyway, the other thing I learned is, to me, when you're splitting a collection, because I have bought collections many times with another person on some of these buying trips, because a lot of them were just two guys. And in almost every situation, the cards were split that weekend or almost the same day. It wasn't 500,000 cards, but they were split. That's what was unusual about this, is that not only were they not split originally, but they were both selling from the big island of cards. And then to chop it now in half, you have to account what was sold before, what somebody maybe had already listed or whatever. So that was the tricky part. Rich, they couldn't have been perfectly satisfied.
I don't know perfectly satisfied, but I think they were satisfied that it was done. It was equitable or reasonably equitable. And they could both move on with not having to think about this deal at all.
How much would you be willing to bet that one guy got a better deal than the other?
Oh, unlimited. I'm sure one guy got slightly better than the other. However, they're both satisfied.
But you don't know which one.
No. It also depends what you're looking
at. I don't either. I made the piles and you helped on that. And to think, because there were all these successive piles, I just think there's no way one of them did way better than the other, maybe even perceptibly better.
If it's 51-49, that doesn't count. It's not 75-25.
I'm saying, I don't even think it's 60-40.
In that case, then they both did fine.
But it probably took third parties like you and me to stand there and say, you know what, these piles are roughly equal. You can pick which one of them. And these were piles of 20 or 30,000 cards, 20,000 cards, let's say, in albums or in these boxes. And some of those piles were worth hundreds of dollars. Some of the piles were worth thousands of dollars probably, but most of them were worth hundreds of dollars. Yeah, but I enjoyed it, and I hope you did too.
Having seen that collection now for the second and hopefully final time.
When I volunteered you, I thought it was 20,000 cards. Because I said, you think it's 20,000 cards? He said, at least that. He didn't tell me. He didn't tell me. It's 500,000. But again, we had a kind of a several step process where you were scanning some of the boxes. And when there was nothing great in it, I could easily divvy them up into the not so great piles. And then if something was better, we set it aside and made sure we were a little more careful with that. So yeah, every time I've split a collection, if I was part of it, like I said, I make two piles and say, I made the piles, you pick which pile you want. And do it that night. Do it before you leave. Not because of a lack of trust as much as it's fresh.
And you want to get it done with. You don't want stuff hanging over your head. This was hanging over heads for a couple of years at this point.
And especially one of the guys had some preferences of things he really wanted to get out of it. And I wanted to accommodate him, but not at the expense of the other guy. And I think we did. When you're divvying it up, he can't say, I don't want any modern cards. It's not fair. But he did want vintage partial sets that he could work on. And I thought we could accommodate that, but I'm going to make sure the piles are equivalent value, and he'll pick the one. I said, this has got the 59 tops in there. You said you wanted it. The other one's got some other stuff that's equivalently good. Look through it. Make sure you still want that. I said, I'm trying to make them equal value. And so it's done.
It was a fun collection to look at for the second time, and I'll leave it at that.
It might have been a one of one. I really don't want to do it again. I want to do it for a friend or as a last resort. And I thought this was a little bit of both. There was a lot of inertia there, and I thought I could be helpful. I got an amazing fail-safe. If you come too, I said, we could make short work of that.
I was surprised how fast you did it.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be an all-afternoon event. I was amazed we got out in time for lunch.
We weren't supposed to be getting paid, Rich. So I mean, it's free labor. Then you're looking for labor-saving shortcuts with still doing the job. And
yes,
there were some great cards in there, and there were a bunch of things I thought, boy, I'd like to make an offer on this, but that's what complicates things. The fact that there was no money changing hands that day. Otherwise, because the son was there, his approach was to get an appraisal or what is this worth? What is that worth? I said, I don't really care. I only care that this pile is roughly the same value as that pile, and your dad can pick whichever one he wants. And he'll be fine financially, but don't ask me whether it's a $500 pile or a $5,000 pile. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it's the same as the other one. So when they bought into that, we were good.
The man